Welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 411 of the podcast. And on this episode, I am talking about Padres closer Mason Miller. I've talked about this on the podcast before, how the closer position isn't what it used to be. When I first started watching baseball, there was Mariano Rivera and Trevor Hoffman, consistent stars and two of the biggest in the game, and it wasn't always the best closers who were known. Once upon a time, most baseball fans knew the name of every team's closer. Those days are long gone. There's one closer who in the early part of this season is making noise, and that's Padres closer Mason Miller. Miller has pitched 8 innings and has struck out 20 of the 27 batters he's faced and has so far only given up 1 hit. People are starting to take notice because he's pitching near perfect, and that's what the modern closer is asked to do. Gone are the days of blowing saves and keeping your job. It's why you don't know the names of most of the other closers in baseball. Miller has been an all-star before in 2024, but this has the feeling of a breakout season for one Mason Miller. And I think it's worth noting that this offseason there was some talk about Mason Miller becoming a starting pitcher, and this is yet another example of how that is never the answer. Aroldis Chapman almost became a starter. So did Jonathan Papelbon, and the latest elite relievers, Daniel Bard and Jabba Chamberlain, who became starting pitchers, struggled mightily and never bounced back as relief pitchers. Clearly, we are talking about a pitcher who can have the most impact as a closer. When he enters a game, you feel like you've already won said baseball game. The only way I would ever turn Mason Miller into a starting pitcher is if I believed he could be an ace, because as invaluable as a closer might feel sometimes, what's even less valuable is a number 3 to 5 starter. If that's all that Mason Miller can become as a starting pitcher, there is no reason for him to ever become a starting pitcher. But if the Padres believed he could become the ace of their staff, then by all means turn him into a starting pitcher. But that doesn't seem to be the situation. The best version of Mason Miller is Mason Miller as the Padres closer. A recent example of this is when the team that I root for, the Boston Red Sox, tried to turn Garrett Whitlock into a starting pitcher. The best version of Garrett Whitlock is as a setup man. He is not special as a starting pitcher. At best, he could be a number 5. But for the Red Sox, he's their 8th inning guy, and he's uber reliable. I also think in most cases, there's no turning back. The Red Sox are very lucky that Garrett Whitlock is back to being an elite level relief pitcher. It took Daniel Bard years and years to getting back to being a reliable reliever, and he was never as good as in his younger days with the Red Sox. He was kind of inconsistent with the Colorado Rockies. Brilliant at times, but inconsistent. And Jabba Chamberlain never got it back. If you turn Mason Miller into a starter, it could have irreversible harm to his baseball career. That is why I don't think it's ever going to happen, nor should it happen. And I'm not one of these guys who believes the 9th inning is more special than the 2nd inning. Maybe I bought into that into the past, but I don't think of it that way. I just think it's important to have a guy who is reliable as your closer, because you don't want to lose ball games because your closer is not good. I think a big reason why people are no longer interested in the position of a closer is because there has been no evolution to the role since Tony La Russa popularized it in the 90s with Dennis Eckersley. He made Dennis Eckersley a specialist, a guy who only pitches in the 9th inning, and fans of analytics, the Brian Kennys of the world, believe that your best relief pitcher should be used in the most crucial situations, no matter the inning. So that's where I think a lot of frustration comes with the modern day closers. The Craig Kimbrels, the Kenley Jansens, the Aroldis Chapmans of the world, they aren't that interesting because they're not very good in non-save situations. They only are very good at doing one thing. One of my favorite recent relief pitchers was Andrew Miller because he wasn't the classic closer. He could pitch multiple innings. He could make an impact outside of the ninth inning. It's just crazy that you still have guys like Kenley Jansen, like Aroldis Chapman, like Edwin Diaz, who all they do are focus on getting the ninth inning save. And now here comes this reliever who's on the rise, and that's what he's doing. Mason Miller is a classic closer. He's not getting multiple inning saves. For as much as we still talk about it, we still value the save. I mean, Kenley Jansen just became the third all-time leader in saves behind only Mariano Rivera and Trevor Hoffman. That still means something to people, even if we really no longer care about the position. When it comes to Mason Miller, it's not even the saves that people care about. It's the tremendous amount of strikeouts. He is striking out a huge amount of batters. He has only given up one hit this entire season. You would be impressed with his numbers, whether he was doing it in the 7th, 8th, or ninth inning. I am telling you, what is special about Mason Miller has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that he is pitching in the ninth inning. I understand why older baseball fans are obsessed with the closer role because these guys used to turn into colorful characters. You had Raleigh Fingers, you had Goose Gossage. I mean, these larger-than-life people who made the ninth inning feel like an event. That is no longer happening. There aren't that same number of relievers, and they're not asked to do the same thing that those relievers of the past were asked to do. And I can't be the only one who feels this way. What I'm about to say is this, and I'm sure there's so many of you who agree. I don't think you should get a save for a free run lead. If you come into a game that is 3-0 and you get free outs, to me, you have done absolutely nothing special. I think a save should be a 2-run lead at maximum. That is how you should get a save. If you can hold a 2-run lead, I will give you a save. But if you have a 3-0 lead and you give up a run and I give you a save, I think that is silly. I think the position of closer needs to evolve, and how we rate closers beyond the save stat needs to evolve. And I do think that baseball has ruined the closer position by themselves, and I think they did the exact same thing to starting pitchers. They devalued their own positions. Now starters don't go as deep, so teams use more relievers than ever, so it doesn't make the closer actually stand out. If you see a guy come into the 7th inning and strike out the side, and then another guy does it in the 9th, what is so special about the guy who's doing it in the 9th inning? We know that the 9th inning is not this mystical, magical inning of baseball. It is the same as any other inning. So if you are seeing other guys throw 100 miles per hour in the 7th inning, and then you're seeing another guy do it in the 9th, that other guy is not going to make you take notice of him. My point in what this entire rant is all about is, yes, Mason Miller makes the most sense as a relief pitcher, but he is special whether he is the closer or not the closer. The role of the closer, to me, absolutely no longer matters. I no longer care which relief pitcher leads the league in saves. That is not a stat that draws my attention. A guy who doesn't give up hits, doesn't give up walks, and strikes out the side consistently, that is something that will make me go, yeah, I need to pay attention to this guy. Because of the stellar start that Mason Miller is having, people are starting to ask the question, does Mason Miller have a chance of winning the Cy Young Award in the National League? In the history of baseball, 9 relievers have a Cy Young Award to their name, and they are Mike Marshall in 1974 with the Dodgers, Sparky Lyle in 1977 with the Yankees, Bruce Sutter with the Cubs in 1979, Raleigh Fingers in 1981 with the Brewers, Willie Hernandez in 1985 1984 with the Tigers, Steve Bedrosian in 1987 with the Phillies, Mark Davis in 1989 with the Padres, Dennis Eckersley in 1992 with the Athletics, and 2003 with Eric Gagne in the Dodgers. But being a reliever back in the day was way different than being a relief pitcher now. For instance, when Mike Marshall won the Cy Young Award in 1974, he pitched 208 innings. That is more than most starters are throwing nowadays. How is somebody actually supposed to compare what Mason Miller is doing to what Paul Skeens is doing for the Pittsburgh Pirates? They are not the same type of pitchers. They are not being asked to do the same job. That is why it's kind of insane that they're up for the same award. But nobody cares about the relief pitcher of the year. So the only thing that Mason Miller could win that people would care about is the Cy Young Award. Eric Gagne won the Cy Young Award for a couple of reasons. He was incredible in a two-season stretch where he didn't blow a save. He was perfect. That's what Mason Miller needs to do to win the NL Cy Young Award. He would need to have a season where he probably doesn't have a blown save. If I'm being honest with myself, I don't see it happening. I don't think Mason Miller will be one of the guys up for the Cy Young Award. Maybe he'll get some votes. Maybe this incredible season will continue to happen. But him winning the award, I don't see it happening unless he pitches in 80-something ball games. The workload for a closer isn't even what it used to be. The same way we no longer give Cy Young Awards to guys just because they won 20 games, we're not going to give a guy a Cy Young Award because he leads the league in saves. So mark my words, if Mason Miller does end up indeed winning the NL Cy Young Award, it will all be because of his insane strikeout numbers. I think now's a good time to talk about the Padres' weird recent history with elite closers. At one point, they had Craig Kimbrell. That's when they were getting a bunch of stars to join their team. Remember, the Padres had Matt Kemp. They had the Upton brothers. The Padres were legitimate, and then that did not work out, and Craig Kimbrell only pitched for the Padres for one season and then became a member of the Red Sox. Fast forward, they make a trade for Josh Hader. He's no longer a member of the Padres. He's now the closer for the Houston Astros. And last year, the team makes this trade for Mason Miller despite having Robert Suarez as their closer. I mean, this is a team that always has a big-name reliever, yet you never know if this guy is going to have a long-term future with the San Diego Padres. I don't know if Mason Miller is going to be a Padre for very long. I mean, the team is winning right now, so you expect him to be with them for at least this season. But does the team think of this guy as a foundational piece, or do they just view him as another relief pitcher who they can replace in a year from now? Because looking at what the Padres have done recently with these relief pitchers, I have my doubts about whether or not they want to lock in Mason Miller to a real contract with real money. I don't expect the headlines anytime soon to say Mason Miller signs a $100 million plus deal with the San Diego Padres. And this is a team that has paid people recently. They paid Fernando Tatis Jr. They've given Manny Machado extensions. They've paid Nick Pivetta. They will sign a number of different positions, but they seem unwilling to put real money into a closing pitcher. And I can't say that I blame them because, like I've been saying on this podcast, the position isn't as valuable as it used to be. And I think it says something that the team that used to have Trevor Hoffman, a guy who was their closer for nearly 2 decades, has been non-committal in recent years to star relievers, the best of the best. Craig Kimbrell, Josh Hader, Mason Miller is now in line with those guys, and his future with the team is up in the air. And I think when Mason Miller gets that big money contract, it's not going to be from the San Diego Padres. That is my prediction. Maybe I'm going to be wrong. Maybe they think of him as the special type of closer that you need to invest real money in. But until that day comes, I don't think it's going to happen. And really, I don't know if it's worth it to invest that kind of money into a relief pitcher anymore. I mean, the Astros gave this enormous contract to Josh Hader, and they haven't seen a lot of winning since that contract. I mean, he's still a very good reliever, but what does having a great closer mean in the year 2026? That is the fatal flaw of the closer position. You need to be winning the baseball game for them to be making any impact on your team whatsoever. You have to have a lead in the ninth inning to use that guy. And the other elephant in the room when it comes to Mason Miller is you just don't know how consistent he's going to be throughout the years. Yes, in the past you had guys like Mariano Rivera and Trevor Hoffman who year in and year out would close out the door and be as consistent as you wanted them to be. But that is not the flight of most modern relief pitchers. They have seasons where they are incredible, and then they have other seasons where you wish you weren't paying them the kind of money you're paying them. Having said all that, Mason Miller does deserve a boatload of praise for what he is doing currently, because he is getting people outside of Padres fans to care about the closing pitcher for the San Diego Padres. I mean, Aroldis Chapman had a great season for the Red Sox last year, yet I don't think a lot of people outside of Red Sox fandom really cared about the year that Aroldis Chapman had. I mean, I talk about it like it was incredible. I just don't think it was appreciated on a national level the way that people are taking note of what Mason Miller is currently doing with the Padres. I'm very much interested to see where his career goes from here, whether or not he remains in the bullpen. He should, whether or not he remains a long-term member of the San Diego Padres. I still just think it's so fascinating that the most noteworthy reliever of the year 2026 is still a closing pitcher. I thought 5 years ago we were going to evolve to a place where we'd be talking about guys pitching in the 6th, 7th, 8th, even the 5th inning to get out of a jam. I thought those guys were going to become the big-time relievers, and that at some point we would replace the classic 9th inning closer, and we still haven't done it. Baseball will change the pace of play. Baseball will bring in the ABS system, but right now baseball seems hesitant to change the role of a closing pitcher, even though most people do not care about closers. They do not care about saves. They do not think the 9th inning is the most important inning. There are not that many current stars who are closers. I mean, who are the names? Right now it's Mason Miller, obviously. I'd still put Chapman in that list. He's still a star. Edwin Diaz. Then after that, you kind of have to fight for people's relevancy. For instance, I don't think most people outside of New York know that the current closer of the New York Yankees is David Bednar. No offense to David Bednar, but he's not Mariano Rivera. He is not a well-known name. That is my point. The closer position isn't what it used to be, and it doesn't have to do what team you play for. Again, David Bednar plays for the New York Yankees, the team that once had Mariano Rivera and at one point had Aroldis Chapman. I mean, I understand the Dodgers bringing in Edwin Diaz to be their closer, but that is a team that won the World Series with Roki Sasaki closing out games in October. That was a team that did not have a classic closer. They won the World Series. Again, I just keep getting back to this point. It does not matter to people that Mason Miller is a closing pitcher. It matters the numbers he's putting up. If he was doing this in the 6th, 7th, or 8th inning, people would still be talking about him. The closer position isn't what it used to be. Relievers still do matter. Mason Miller matters. He's the best reliever in baseball right now, and I'm excited to see if he can be one of the people competing for the National League Cy Young Award. Do I think it's going to happen? No. I think it's impossible for him to compete with the Paul Skeens of the world, the Yoshinobu Yamamoto photos. Those guys are pitching a lot of innings. And my last point, and I don't mean this to offend Mason Miller because I don't mean it as disrespectful, but I will say this. I think one of the reasons he's currently standing out as an NL Cy Young Award finalist is because the closer position lacks a lot of special arms. I mean, back in the day, nobody was talking about Mariano Rivera winning a Cy Young Award because also playing the game of baseball was Trevor Hoffman, Francisco Rodriguez. There were other elite relievers of that day. Right now, there's not. So Mason Miller is really standing out against the pack, and rightfully so. He's doing incredible things on the mound. What he's doing is hard to do in modern baseball, becoming a big name out of the bullpen. I think it's hard to be a well-known baseball player, being a relief pitcher in 2026. But here we are, and Mason Miller definitely deserves the moment he's currently having. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every week on Apple Podcast and Spotify. So please rate, review, and subscribe.